The question is, does church history support the Roman Catholic Church? Well, I think the appropriate answer to that is Roman Catholic Church history supports the Roman Catholic Church. Obviously, they have their own history, but to say that all of the history of the Church unanimously comes behind Rome is not true. I think you can show in the Church Fathers that there was a clear understanding of justification by grace through faith alone. I think you can show in the Fathers that there was no commitment, say, to the papacy. There was no commitment to Mary, to various things that the Church does in the Mass, etc., etc. So no, you can't say that the Roman Catholic system is universally supported by the history of the Church. Furthermore, throughout the years of the Roman Catholic monolith in the Western world, there were always dissenters. There were always those who upheld the true faith, whether you were talking about Waldensians or Anabaptists or Huguenots or whatever it was. There were always those groups who really were the remnant of those who held to the true New Testament gospel. Do the early church fathers have unanimous agreement on the doctrine of the Catholic Church? Absolutely not. Somebody said years ago, and I think there's a certain amount of truth, you can prove almost anything by going to the church fathers. Because there's so much diversity, and because you don't always know the context, you can take what they say and send it one direction or another. But how could the early church fathers support unanimously the doctrines of the Catholic Church when the doctrines of the Catholic Church didn't even develop until after the church fathers? I mean, there are so many components of Catholicism that came after the church fathers in the councils, say from 325 to 725. There were solid things that were decided that the church fathers would agree on, things that had to do with Trinitarianism and the deity of Christ and things like that. But all kinds of things developed in Catholicism over time that the early church fathers don't even address. Is there such a thing as apostolic succession, and does it prove that Rome is a true church? That's easy to answer. There is no such thing as apostolic succession. It cannot be proven at all. In fact, the apostolate is a self-contained group. We know exactly who the apostles are because they were witnesses to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Even the apostle Paul feels a little bit guilty in calling himself an apostle, so he has to say, I was an apostle sort of born out of the normal time. I'm sort of a late entry, an addendum to the whole thing, but he understands the nature of that apostleship is that he himself has also seen the resurrected Christ. And I think when you have the end of the ministry of the Apostle Paul, clearly you have the terminus point of the apostolate. There is nothing in the Bible to justify any kind of extension of the apostolate beyond that. Especially the fabrication that somehow the apostolate winds up in Rome and belongs to a pope. No one could be an apostle who hadn't seen the risen Christ. That was a qualification given clearly in the New Testament. Is there any circular reasoning in saying that the Catholic Church is infallible? Of course there is. They got you in a corner. Because if you say that they're infallible, then you sort of, that's a presupposition. They can't prove that because that in itself is a statement that's subject to scrutiny. It's clear that they're not infallible because they're in error about so many doctrines. They misrepresent the New Testament. They teach a wrong doctrine of salvation. Clearly they're not infallible. To say that I accept the infallibility of the church is to accept a statement by a fallible organization that they're infallible. I mean, just look. Look at the history of the church. The fallibility of the Roman system ought to be very clear. They are doctrinally in error. That the system is full of scandalous conduct from the papacy on down. They have misrepresented history. They literally massacred true believers, etc. Et cetera, et cetera. So what you've got is you've got a fallible system claiming infallibility and people just accepting that claim as some kind of an established presupposition. Obviously, the church is not infallible, but they want to establish their infallibility because then they're in control of everything. So if you grant them that, that's the end of the discussion. Yeah, I think the definition of a church is simply the assembly of believers. It doesn't define an institution of any kind of human structure or perpetuity. It only describes the assembly of believers. There is a physical element of the church, and when believers actually physically get together. There is a spiritual component of the church, and that is the spiritual body of Christ, the assembling together on the spiritual level of believers, like-minded faith. But beyond that, the New Testament doesn't define the church in any institutional way.